person. So, oh, there you go. So in the chat is a word that is found in some of the earliest Buddhist texts that, again, I'm not going to try and pronounce it at 8 o'clock in the morning, um, especially when my daughter had me up an hour and a half ago. But this word loosely translates as pivoting or rotating gender, or it's sometimes interpreted as third gender, bigender, gender fluid, gender flux. It has fallen, from what I'm given to understand, somewhat out of favor in the last 500 years. So just recently. But we do still see occasionally a word, pandaka, which means non-binary. And Pandanka is the only word that survives today with any regularity, but it's also involved to encompass the entire the entire spectrum of gender nonconforming people. Um, some of the things that we see that we're starting to discover in indigenous culture of North, Central, and South America is that transgender people were very well established as just part of the human fabric well before European colonization. Unfortunately, a lot of the names are lost at this point, but some of the ones that we do know are Mushe, which was a Zapotec word that still survives in Mexico today. There are colonies of Mushe, where trans people live freely and openly, and some of the local culture still does respect them in the same way that they were respected in when indigenous before colonization, and before the imperial powers came in with Christianity. Um, we see the words biza'a, we see nadle, we see lamana, Ninoapotsukotetspike. That one's always a mouthful. Um, and I know I'm not exactly pronouncing it right. These are all just a few words from some of the many nations of indigenous people, from Lakota, from Blackfoot, from Diné, from Zuni. Um, we have still the term, it was recently discovered, actually, only a few years ago, the term Quarami, which was from the Inca. Specifically, the Quarami were priestesses, here we are again, of the jaguar deity Chuki. Um, Chuki Chinche, I apologize. Two-part name. Still waking up, I'm sorry. Um, the deity, it was not a he or a she. The deity was a third gender, and third genders in those Mesoamerican populations and the cultures were as they were with the Sumerian Empire and the worship of Inanna. They were the priestesses. They were the bringers of comfort. They were the bringers of law. They were the bringers of civilization. And we see that repeated constantly through um, North American and South American indigenous cultures, where trans people were seen as having a foot in two worlds. Whether they were binary or non-binary trans, they had experience of being one side and the other, and they came together in the middle. They served as spiritual guides, they served as legal guides, and they were respected for their knowledge and for their connection to deity and to the earth. And that thankfully is starting to be uh, reinvigorated with the adoption across many of the North American indigenous groups of the word of the term two-spirit. There are just in North America alone, roughly, I think there are roughly 200 separate language words for trans people. And so there was in 2005 for a large conference that was held, and all of the nations that came with representatives, they settled on the term two-spirit because they thought it best described what all of the words were in all of their different languages. And that is where we are, at least in North America today. When I am in the state of New Mexico, there is a large population of indigenous people here, both primarily Dene, what is known sometimes as Navajo, and Zuni. And I do occasionally hear on the street someone say, "Oh, not Lie." And it always kind of makes me feel a little good. So that is a very brief history of trans existence globally. I will apologize that records of East Asia, of China, Korea, Siberia, Japan, and many of the island nations are a little too varied to get into. We touched a little bit on Africa, but there are records of trans people throughout the African continent, throughout the Pacific and island nations. There are some, to some extent, in China and Korea and Japan, and most everything in Russia and Siberia has been completely eradicated by the current um, political climate, and those records are no longer available. And so I can't back up what anything I say about those words and those names and those and the existence of trans people there, and as well as many of the Caucasus. So I will leave it there and see if there are any questions.